Let's take a moment to chat about collecting evidence. Throughout the story, Number of the Stars, we're going to be collecting evidence to answer questions and to write. First, we're going to need colored pens, and then also Post-it notes. It helps if you have colored Post-it notes, but it's not necessary. Now, the techniques that we're going to chat about today can be used in Number the Stars, but also anytime you have to read and answer questions using evidence in literature. Let's take a look. Our first step is to read the question first. Now, the reason we read the questions first is first, to know what we're going to be looking for while we're reading, and second, to make sure that all of the evidence that we're collecting relates to the question. Now, throughout our study of Number the Stars, you'll notice that each chapter selections will have a guiding question. Those are the questions that we're going to be looking for evidence to support and then writing about. Now, the first question in our Number the Stars study is, what was life like in Denmark during German occupation? This is the question we're going to take a look at today. Here's where our colored pens and Post-it notes come in. First, choose one color to use to track evidence. I've chosen my blue pen to track my evidence. Now, as I'm reading, I'll find anything that will support my guiding question. What was life like during German occupation? Once I find a piece of evidence that tells me what life was like, I'm going to write a page number at the top of my sticky note or my Post-it note. Then I'll briefly describe the evidence and record my thoughts at the bottom. Here's my example. You can see that I found a piece of evidence on page 2 of the reading. And to briefly describe the evidence I found, I wrote, Anne-Marie, Kirsty, and Ellen run into 2 soldiers on the street corner. Then my thoughts were that before occupation, there were no soldiers on street corners in Denmark. This is my first piece of evidence that I can use in writing. Here's another example I found. On page 6, you can see at the top, I found some evidence to support what life was like during German occupation. There was no coffee, and the mother and Mrs. Rosen had to drink hot water flavored with herbs instead of coffee. And at the bottom, my thoughts were, well, they must have had coffee before occupation. You can see that I've kept my notes in my blue pen. Once I've finished with a piece of evidence, I stick it directly on the page in which I found it. That way, if I have to go back and maybe quote the evidence, I know exactly what page it's on, and I know exactly what I'm looking for because I have my brief description as well as my thoughts on the page. After I finished reading a few chapters, approximately 3 chapters, I like to write a little mini summary just to remind myself of the major plot points that I've just read. I choose a different colored pen. Now I've chosen a red pen for this. And I write it on a sticky. But you can see instead of writing a page number on the top left, I've written the chapters 1 through 3. Just write the major plot points. Details are not important. Just like I stuck my evidence exactly in the book where the evidence is found, I stick my mini summary at the back of the last chapter I summarized. After I finish reading my chapter selections, I'm going to use my evidence that I've collected in my writing. Here's a piece of writing that I've used my evidence to support my answer. Now, remember to include the page number in which you found the evidence. You can paraphrase or quote directly from the book, but as long as you're citing your sources, as you can see in pink, I've collected 2 pieces of evidence, and one is found on page 2 and the other is found on page 6. Then I'm supporting my answer with evidence from the book. Now we're ready to dive into Number the Stars.